DAO quarterly webinar. I am Jacqueline Melnick. I'm the founder and CEO of Token Relations, and joining me today is Rich Rhines, the initial contributor at the Core Foundation. Rich, it's so good to see you. I feel like we've been doing this for a while now, and it's always nice to catch up. So I'm excited to talk.
Totally. Yeah, it's been way too long. Really excited to chat today and to bring the message to the core audience.
Yeah. Before we get started, I'd like to remind listeners that during today's recording, we may discuss forward-looking statements and actual results may vary from today's statements. So with that said, let's get started with some background and context. Core is a Bitcoin-powered EVM-compatible blockchain that has introduced non-custodial Bitcoin staking. It has over 69.2 million total unique addresses and has processed more than 26 million transactions throughout Q3. With the year coming to a close, I also want to discuss plans with Rich about what's happening in the new year. But first, Rich, looking back on 2025, I know we have like 2 weeks left, but looking back on the year, what were some of the key areas that have, qualitatively and quantitatively scaled Core?
So I think we made a number of improvements to the chain itself that I think have already taken our category leading position in BTC-Fi to the next level. So we've got the block time down significantly. We've added additional scalability and throughput to make it feel more of like a Solana, Sui, et cetera, kind of next-gen chain experience, which is great for DeFi gaming and all sorts of other applications that have been built on Core. And we do have a pretty vibrant ecosystem of hundreds of applications on top of the chain today. We also added Rev Plus, which is a feature to allow revenue sharing amongst different protocols on the chain, and that was another big win. And I think the biggest kind of two wins for us over 2025 were really the institutionalization of Core in terms of helping to spread the message of Core, the asset, and the value that Core brings to these different institutional holders of both Bitcoin and Core, and then also helping to get out the gospel of non-custodial yield. And we spent a lot of time with small institutional providers all the way up to some of the largest funds and institutional asset managers in the world, explaining the different unique value props that Core can bring to their different products and services that they're bringing to their end customers. And we'll talk about that more, I'm sure, as we kind of go through some of the roadmap pieces. But I think that puts us in a pretty unique vantage point relative to many of the BTC-Fi chains who haven't really been able to break out of their pretty small community of users. We're trying to really play the long game, and this has been something we've been focused on since day one of trying to bring value to both Bitcoin and Core holders, whether they're individual retail users or the largest institutions in the world.
Yeah. I think also kind of going towards 2026, I want to talk about Core's roadmap and how does it kind of fit into the primary objective around, revenue, Core buybacks, and so on and so forth when we kind of discuss like what's to come.
So 2025 was a hard year, I think, for most
Mhm.
L1s, and I think that's to put it mildly. But I think it's just that the game changed, if you will. And I think for a long time there was kind of this understanding that the main way to grow at L1 was just through demand for your native token to be used as gas in your DeFi gaming, et cetera, ecosystem. And I think that changed probably a quarter midway through the year as the focus really became, okay, how do these L1s become sustainable revenue generating
Yeah.
businesses? And I think that's actually a healthy maturation of the space. I think, if we think about the analogies to kind of traditional financial world and traditional just stock market generally, you have a lot of startups that never kind of really make it past this initial, birthing of their product into something that actually has sustainable product market fit. And I think throughout 2024, we actually had product market fit with many of our products, like dual staking and Core's initial Bitcoin staking offering. But now the demands the market put upon us were how do you go beyond that? And how do you actually have products and services that directly benefit token holders on a daily
Mhm.
basis? And this is a big push for us in 2026 as we look beyond just being kind of a yield service provider and an application layer for both Core and Bitcoin applications. Now it's LSTs, it's neobanking, and all of these different products and services that we're either building or partnering with others to build will be performing some amount of Core buybacks, which is the best way that we currently have available to share those benefits with token holders directly. And I think, we might be early on this charge from BTC-Fi, but I think in general, this is where most L1s will have to shift, where at the end of the day, if you're not providing daily value to token holders, you're probably failing them in some way. And that's a message that we've taken loud and
Mhm.
clear. And we're very excited to bring to market here over the
Mm.
coming months.
What would you say is like the ideal product market fit right now then compared to maybe 2024?
So I think in 2024, if we look just across kind of the L1 space, what most groups were trying to do was kind of copy and paste ecosystem or like a Solana ecosystem to a degree, right? You had your DEX, you had a perps DEX, you probably had a borrow lend, but you had these like kind of noted piece of your infrastructure, and everyone was trying to kind of compete playing that same game ultimately to try to get more and more demand for your native token. And then you'd have staking and a few other syncs that were like important to kind of tie that all together, but that was kind of the game on the field. And I think now what we've seen in 2025 is it's shifted dramatically to specialization. And I think you have Ethereum, mainly known for stablecoins, but they also have the most generic DeFi ecosystem. Solana, you have meme coins, and then you have high throughput, quick execution, low latency trading, and like they have kind of their niche. And then for core, our niche is things related to Bitcoin and Bitcoin utility while trying to deliver value to our core token holders. But if you're trying to play that generalized L1 game, I think that demand just isn't really there yet. And that's why it's so important that whatever your niche is, it needs to have benefit to your native token holders. And that's why, to use like a Solana example or an Ethereum example, you actually see consumption of those native tokens with every trade, et cetera, that goes on, very similar to what we're trying to do with the
Mhm.
buybacks.
When you kind of think about Core's utility and in the Bitcoin space, how do you kind of envision shifting from a pull to more of a push approach in capturing Bitcoin yields?
So another lesson that we learned in 2025, if you will, is that there's tons of demand for Bitcoin yield and using Bitcoin as collateral. The more long tail use of that Bitcoin in DeFi is going to take a little bit longer than we wanted it to. And I've been beating the drum on Bitcoin DeFi now for gosh, I don't know how many
Yeah,
years, and have been looking to put my Bitcoin to work for
yeah.
12 years since I first got in the space. But just it's going to take longer for institutions and large holders to go do that. Part of that is a technological problem, right? Like, how do you do it safely without maybe wrapping or swapping? And we thought that was one of the major gates. But now there's actually been a ton of research and development that has mostly mitigated that, and still not really kind of seeing the huge institutional flows there. And I think it's really just the product market fit are around those two main use cases. And it's how do we make those use cases as easy and approachable for all of these different participants? And on one side, you've got like the B2C approaches. And I think that's where SatPay, the Bitcoin neobank, is going to be so impactful because it will allow anyone, whether you're a large holder of Bitcoin or a very small holder of Bitcoin, to use it as a savings account to borrow against your Bitcoin, to earn on your Bitcoin, and ultimately to spend it. But it's meeting all of those different demands where the customer is at today versus trying to pull them along that spectrum. And for a long time, I've given that spectrum out of, hey, you do nothing with your Bitcoin, or maybe you start with staking or dual stake, and then eventually you swap, wrap, or bridge over. And I think now we're pretty fully understanding that like that back half is going to take another 3 to 5 years to really mature. So how do we meet the audience where they're at? And that's where we will see kind of the B2C with SatPay. But then if we think about these other constituents, whether they're LSTs, et cetera, those are more general purpose where you can bring people, whether they're just trying to loop in DeFi or they're going to be backing for ETPs or ETFs. That audience is extremely large, in the tens or hundreds of billions today, and trying to deliver those products and services is very important to us. And a lot of this came from hard-won lessons throughout 2025 of having all of these in-depth customer development, business development product meetings, where we've ultimately led to this kind of co-creation state where we're at today. And I think you'll see many of these products launch in early 2026 with fairly heavy backing of known participants. So it was a lot of work to get here. We had a lot of stops and starts on that journey, but that's why we're so bullish on 2026, is we have an insight and ability to execute on these things that we don't think others do.
Yeah, I mean, with those products ideally coming on board in 2026, why is that so significant for the ecosystem? And what do you kind of see the near-term effects opposed to maybe the long-term, the 3 to 5 year mark, let's say 2026 reactions to all this?
So I think you're going to see quite a bit of demand for core token that we didn't have prior. So like one of the examples that I think is really interesting is where as we work with many of these, asset management protocols and some of these, liquid staking protocols, they're devising these strategies for generating yield that are not just dependent upon Core's dual staking. So they'll use dual staking as some percentage, and they'll use other low risk strategies, kind of creating this symphony of different yield, if you will. And with that, you now have yield that is coming out that is not just paid in Core. It might be paid in Bitcoin, it could be paid in stable coins. And some of that will, of course, go to buy back Core tokens, which is to the benefit of all the different Core token holders. But what's really nice about that is it opens up these other capital piles to be participants in the Core ecosystem where historically that would be a tough sell. So one of the examples that I think is very helpful to think about it, and we pioneered these initial, Bitcoin staking ETPs that are live throughout the Nordics
Yeah.
and on the LSE as of a few months ago. But if you think about those, there's a lot of barriers to getting started there, right? Like you have to get the Bitcoin in, you have to find a way to get the Core. Like it's not necessarily as smooth as it could be, but it's still a great product and has had tremendous inflows. We'll continue to push those sorts of products because those are kind of like the most pure version of how these work. But I think what you're going to see in 2026 is these staking based ETFs, ETPs, because you've seen them for Ethereum, you've seen it for Solana, you're going to see for Bitcoin as well. And with each one of those that we can get backed by a participant that we have, there will be buyback. So as an example, it's like, okay, can we get some of these ETFs that are already in the tens of billions or hundreds of billions, some percentage of that move towards a liquid staking token backing it? Great. Those are now participants in the Core ecosystems through buybacks. And you
Mhm.
can call that, kind of an end around solution, but I think that's where the market is at today. And that's what we think will drive a tremendous amount of value for Core token holders and demand, because now it's not just a linear process of me having to kind of bring you along each step. I'm delivering you a ton of value up front. And then as a result, the yield gets better, everybody wins. And we're pretty bullish upon, those coming to market, next year.
Mhm. On the front of like multiple yield strategies, how does Core kind of balance risk, reward, institutional attention? It's like a bunch of moving parts that you have to keep in mind.
So we've learned a ton about this in 2025 as well, and there's no, perfect answers here, but it
Right.
comes down to what is the right balance for, the fat part of the curve, if you will. And we care a lot about building a product that is institutional grade, whether you're an institution or retail, right? You shouldn't have to sacrifice or go kind of too far outside of your comfort zone to get access to those, same things the institutions would demand. But I think in general, how we view these, whether asset management protocols, LSTs, et cetera, you should have some percentage that's dual staking, which is totally self-custodial, so there is no counterparty risk, et cetera, associated with it. And then you'll mix in maybe basis, call overriding. You could potentially do some stable strategies. Like there's kind of a spectrum that you can go down, but all of that needs to be, totally disclosed at the outset. And I think with that, you will naturally sub-select out different opportunities for different groups. Some people will want to take different strategies that have risk. Others will want to be purely probably in dual staking land, and that's fine. And this is why we're partnering with so many different groups. But I think the end state probably has a mix of several of these strategies, which will make it ultimately more resilient in all market conditions.
Mhm.
And now, and I think the other story of 2025 is probably every one of our competitors copying dual staking, which is kind of funny in a way. But I think
Yeah.
with that is like they will learn that dual staking has a lot of amazing benefits, but it also has drawbacks. And it's all about trying to divine products that work in all market conditions, because otherwise you'll see inflows and outflows. You'll have to kind of balance a bunch of different challenges there. And I think you kind of only learn that by doing it, if you will. And with that knowledge, we think the next wave of products and services will be that much better.
Yeah. Rich, you brought up asset management protocols, and I'm not too familiar with that. Maybe some people in the audience aren't either. So could you kind of walk us through what they are, how do they work, and how it kind of, goes back to the core?
So I think we might have coined this term. I'm not sure. I shout
There we
out to
go.
our
Yeah.
team for developing it. I think the way that we think about it is generalized term for some sort of managed structure on chain.
Um,
And that can be doing very simple things or, quite esoteric things. And we see this today, like kind of generalized again in terms of like vaults in DeFi. And I think we've seen that some of these vaults disclose risks, some of them don't
yeah.
disclose. Like there's been kind of a hodgepodge of how that's all been put together. But I think these asset management protocols for Bitcoin have a very unique picture because Bitcoin has no native yield. And historically, if you wanted to go get Bitcoin yield, you'd have to go kind of farther down the risk curve than you may have wanted to go. But now with these different asset management protocols, and we'll do some amount of, so it's obviously for permissionless systems, people can launch whatever they want. But with ones that get, our branding, et cetera, we will work, very closely with do more and more, kind of novel things, and then kind of some folks that do some simple things. Some will have tokenized versions of it, some won't. But this is kind of the next level of Bitcoin yield that needs to get out there. Some people just want kind of staking derivatives. Others want fully fund, managed on chain, and everything on, in that spectrum can, happen as part of the core ecosystem. And then, of course, for anything that we partner with, some percentage of that yield will go into buybacks. So that's kind of the rough landscape, if you will. There's a lot of devil in the details there, but I think we'll be able to talk about some of the more specific versions of this not far from now.
Yeah. On the front of these asset managed protocols, though, the infrastructure, how does that kind of enable builders to create more institutional grade products on core? Like, what is the opportunity there?
So one of the big pieces of kind of unique insight that we have is we've done all the reps with the large institutions at this point. And that's one of the kind of pieces of the partnership model. Closely with these partners, we can bring kind of that institutional seal of understanding and approval to go bring that within our network and within our partners to help go get these things to the scale which they need to actually be revenue generating businesses and sustainable for the long term. And if you partner that with Core's ecosystem that has, I think in 2026 it'll be under 1 second block times. You've got all the dual staking term structures that are coming into place, plus the dual staking infrastructure. You kind of have this killer recipe for building these products. And then we, of course, have a great, BD and go-to-market team to support these. So it's a mix of tech and then the soft skills.
Yeah. I see some comments coming in on the front of liquid staking tokens, or LSTs, as we like to call them. They've historically kind of struggled to deliver sustainable yields just across the board. So, on that front, how does Core kind of plan to shift that narrative and make LSTs, a dominant factor within the BTC5 space?
So we've seen a lot of challenges with this in the BTC5 space. And I think if we look back into early 2024, throughout that whole kind of year, and then early 2025, we saw a lot of these products that had points programs that were great at bringing in initial value, but may or may not have actually delivered in the end. And then
Yeah.
many of these protocols actually becoming just Bitcoin wrappers at the end of the day when the yield couldn't sustain itself. And this is something that we spent a lot of time working on, and we were pretty vocal against quite a few of these points programs as they were developing. And this is where the idea for like Bitcoin staking and dual staking and everything kind of came out of. And now we've gone to kind of the next level of understanding, if you will, which is dual staking needs to be a recipe for this soup, but it can't probably be. The staking performs better in bull markets than it does in bear markets. And that's just kind of the fact of how that piece works, but that's fine. And with that, we can layer on other, different yield strategies, or these service providers can, to put it more accurately. But I think by putting those two together, you can get these all-weather protocols that can attract huge amounts of capital from all participants. And that's the end of the day. Like, I don't think we've seen any of these LSTs or Bitcoin wrappers, et cetera, really hit institutional scale. Like our friends at BitGo have done a great job with WBTC, but it's still kind of a rounding error in terms of like the overall opportunity for yield bearing Bitcoin. And I think that's where we all need to be collectively, shooting our sights higher. We need to be looking at, orders of magnitude more Bitcoin unlocked. And we think this is the strategy with which to do so.
Yeah, I mean, beyond these protocols and maybe the DeFi arena, so to speak, how else do you kind of see LSTs becoming a foundation, whether it's in something like ETFs, savings accounts, or other regulated products out there?
So I think these will, and I think if you look at like STETH as a good example, right? Like it became so dominant in DeFi so quickly because you had this ability to take your staking yield with you. And I think Bitcoin is very similar in that that's what the market craves. It just wants yield that it's comfortable with. And I think we're going to see a big push there in 2026, not just on Core, where it will be homed on, but throughout other ecosystems as well. And we're actually directly incented to go do this now because this yield will also be benefiting, all the core holders in the core network. And I think you'll see a big push there as we try to go help create, the different STETHs for Bitcoin in these other ecosystems. And I think that will be, very accretive. And I think you'll see some basic strategies like looping that people will want to do to get the yield up. And, that's you know, totally one valid path to go down. But we think we have the pole position on is going to be for these more traditional financial product opportunities. And that's where the largest wells of capital are today. Right. And if you just look at the size of the ETFs
Mhm.
relative to DeFi protocols, right, like it's not even close. And I think that's where there is just so much to unlock and bring back that, kind of institutional grade knowledge and execution back to the DeFi ecosystem. And I think that, is quite a interesting and untapped opportunity today.
Yeah. Do you think these institutions are starting to understand LSTs and kind of the opportunity on this front? Because I know there is like the educational learning curve to this, and then also just like the general interest, right? So do you see that as growing or?
I think it's growing quite rapidly, and we owe a lot of thanks to the Ethereum community for this. Primarily, I'd say the folks over at Lido. Um, I think it's not a coincidence that so many teeth. I think they've built an amazing product. They've got the deepest liquidity, etc. But that's so useful to us as we have very similar conversations because we now have an analogy that these folks understand, and then it's just kind of transposing that into the Bitcoin space, and it's like a 1 + 1 = 3 moment where you can just
Mhm.
kind of see it click very quickly, and then it comes down to, okay, can we build a product together with partners, et cetera, that everybody is comfortable with? And then, okay, how do we go, put that into place as fast as possible?
Yeah. Maybe to play devil's advocate, is there anything holding it back?
Oh man, hit me with the hard balls. So I think one of the things that has held this back historically is it's not as simple of a story as STE, because with STE, it's very simple. It's like, okay, you just stake it and like you have to deal with the associated slashing risks. Pretty clear, well understood story. With Bitcoin, because you don't have anything that is native to the Bitcoin chain, there isn't that just immediate understanding of, okay, here's where the yield comes from, et cetera. And I think where many of these will wind up as like a yield soup, if you will, that there is another level of understanding and kind of product creation that works together. And I think that's not a bad thing, right? I think it's like at the end of the day, we need to co-create a product that people feel comfortable putting billions of dollars into. It should go through the 10 rounds of DD to get there.
Yeah. I also want to shift gears and talk a little bit more about the dual staking marketplaces. Core is planning on introducing those, and it's aimed at solving, the Bitcoin only holder bottleneck. How do you kind of expect this to play out? Do you see it improving? I mean, hopefully, right? But like, I guess, what are the steps that need to happen in order for that to become a reality?
Some early traction here with protocols on core like B14G that have created these dual staking marketplaces that have brought both sides of this equation together, and both sides critically wind up better off, right? As a Bitcoin holder, you have no native yield, so having a core holder on the other side that helps bring some of that yield to you is of course very beneficial and powerful for you to have. And this is a model that we think has a lot of legs, and there's many others that are working on incorporating this as part of their products and services as well, with their own twist, right? Their own kind of like none of them are exactly the same, but I think that's a pretty powerful concept for people to understand. This is how you can attract, both sides of this. And I think that's been kind of one of the key unlocks for helping this to grow, right? Is by trying to make sure that all parties have their needs met. And I think by having buybacks on the other side of this as well, it makes that loop. You're going to see these dual staking marketplaces emerge in all sorts of different protocols. So some will be pure, staking protocols. Some will be asset management protocols. There'll be LSTs. You name it, we're going to see it.
Mhm. What are the other opportunities you think are worth expanding on in the front of dual staking in 2026?
So we're pretty fired up about dual staking term structures in particular. And I think one of the cool parts about dual staking is, you have these multipliers that reward you for participating on both sides. Of course, dual staking marketplaces make that even more efficient. But I think beyond that, you're now going to see people that want to have time preference expressed as well. And I think that's important because once you have term structures, you have the other primitive that's required for building out things like Bitcoin bonds or otherwise, where you need duration. And I see a bunch of experimentation for the next few years because ultimately that sort of experimentation is where we're going to see even more interesting and more novel products built. And it also rewards long-term alignment with the core ecosystem, right? Because you're now staking that for a longer period. It's now more active, if you will, versus kind of more short-term. So one of the things we're excited about, we've been thinking about it for a long time. I think we've now done enough prep work and explainers to the different institutions for them to be able to turn it on. So yeah, we're pretty fired up about it.
When can we expect that? Is there a
I
timeline?
think I think you'll see term structures come out in early Q1. This is something the team put a lot of effort into, and it was primarily not limited by tech. Like we solved the tech part of it a while ago, but it's all about like kind of what's behind door number three, right? Like you have to educate the market to get
Yeah.
them there. And I think now the market is primed and ready for it.
I also want to talk about SatPay. Core introduced it in its 2026 roadmap. What is it? What is SatPay?
SatPay is our take on a Bitcoin neobank, and we're couldn't be any more excited to bring this
Interesting.
to market. We partner with an amazing group called Mobilium. We've had a long-standing relationship with those folks over the last several years, and we kind of co-created this idea of how do we get Bitcoin yield and Bitcoin savings accounts in the hands of as many people globally as we could. And the easy answer was, okay, it needs to be a really simple and easy to use mobile app, right? It needs to be available on Android, iOS, whatever. Now your total addressable market is 8 billion people, give or take. Like you kind of hit that extremely fat part of the curve. And it needs to have these very clear cut value props. You'd be able to bring Bitcoin in. That Bitcoin needs to earn yield, be able to borrow against it. Again, those two key use cases that Bitcoin using a debit card, you can do so globally. And those were kind of the killer functionality pieces that had to come into place. And we'll have a beta probably in Q1, I would assume. Maybe we'll be able to get it out a little bit faster, but there's a lot of hard engineering that goes into that. But we truly think this is the killer app for the using of Bitcoin that will ultimately help not only make it go mainstream, if you will, but just help kind of disintermediate the different banking functions, which is what I've been trying to do for the last 12, 13 years now. But I think that form factor is what the market's looking for. It's a significantly better product than what's in market today, and I think we couldn't be any more excited to bring it to the world.
Mhm. Maybe help me understand this, because how can a Bitcoin neobank be helpful in converting Bitcoin yield and core gas usage into more of a real consumer utility?
Oh, great question. So in terms of SatPay, so that's one of the big
Mhm.
pieces. You'll see borrow, lending, et cetera, take place in the core blockchain, but then also these different yield products that it allows you to allocate into will also perform buybacks. So just by using this, you'll be helping to benefit all the core token holders. I think SatPay will launch other products or like other kind of verticals as time goes on as well. But those are kind of the key consumer use cases to nail, and if this product can go out there and nail that, I think it will have significantly positive impact on core holders.
Mhm. How else do you kind of see SatPay integrating with the BTC-Fi applications for users while also driving like reoccurring core buybacks and other things?
So hopefully this becomes the daily driver for a lot of people. And again, that can be the form function of paying your friends, like in the application, kind of like a Venmo or Cash App, et cetera, type use case, or just your day-to-day groceries and that sort of thing with your debit card activities, and now bringing them home to the core ecosystem. And this is where I kind of used that end around example earlier, but it's how do we make it ubiquitous in the life of Bitcoin holders and core holders that this product helps deliver value on a day-to-day basis. And that took a lot of reinventing the wheel, thinking about it from first principles, and ultimately inverting the problem to get to a spot where people could use it daily. And I think this will eventually become people's portal, not only to saving and borrowing and all that sort of thing, but also to how they experience Bitcoin DeFi. And hopefully that will be able to be done in this kind of safe sandbox environment that has pre-vetted applications, et cetera, that people can go deploy into in safe ways. There's a big vision there. It won't all be available at once, but I think if we build this right, it's a 10-year journey that will have an immense impact on core holders of Bitcoin holders.
Yeah. I mean, in front of Bitcoin DeFi or BTC Fi, as we often call it, what do you think is really like the key driver for 2026 that you want to tap into? Obviously, there's that institutional involvement that's budding that we've seen over the past like 12 to 18 months. But on the front of BTC Fi, I think there's a lot more opportunity there, right? So, how do you kind of structure your vision and mindset around it looking into the new year?
So I think in 2026, it's all about delivering the killer apps or like killer utilities to Bitcoin holders. And I do think it needs to address one of those two key use cases, which is either like yield or leverage against your Bitcoin. But those form factors will vary dramatically, right? Like we've got SatPay on kind of the kind of key B2C side. Then you have asset management protocols that kind of span both. And then you have these LSTs that span both as well, and then a variety of like institutional focused offerings, as well as some of these enterprise offerings that we're also co-creating with. So those benefit core token holders is really the magic ingredient, right? It's not just about delivering the value to Bitcoin holders, it's about delivering value to core holders on a day-to-day basis. And that's ultimately how we continue to strengthen the core community, but also strengthen the value prop that we can bring to both sides. And in a way that almost looks like the dual staking marketplace, right? Where it's by bringing all these things together, all sides wind up better off. But I think that's the story of 2026. It's killer apps, killer utilities, and then driving lots of demand to both.
I love it. Killer apps, killer utilities, and driving demand. That's catchy. You guys should start using that.
I'll tell our social team to get right on it.
Yeah, there we go. How else is
Hopefully they're watching.
yeah, yeah. Hopefully they're paying attention. Yeah, take notes on that one. Um, Rich, how else is Core positioning itself as, the infrastructure backbone for enterprise Bitcoin yields, balance sheet management, et cetera? What do you think on that front?
A couple different things there that one of the things that we've had the very fortunate position of in 2026 is getting to know many of the largest Bitcoin holders out there and some of the largest funds, et cetera, that are actively deploying either into ETFs, ETPs, which call it active, call that non-active,
Right.
or are just evaluating this space, more broadly. And through that, one of the things that we've kind of realized is there's a variety of institutional offerings for Bitcoin that are currently not met yet. And I think we can take a lot of inspiration from what we've seen in the stablecoin space, where stablecoins were like kind of interesting for a lot of folks for a while, and then some acquisitions start happening. All of a sudden, every bank wants its own stablecoin. Like we've kind of seen this Cambrian explosion take place, and I think that's going to be the story of banking for like the next 5 to 10 years, right? And I feel very strongly that that's one, a net good, but two, like this kind of unstoppable force at this point, now that we have the Genius Act, et cetera, in the US that kind of lays down the ruling. Okay, if we have this parallel with stablecoins, what's the other thing that we're really confident that banks are going to offer in the next 3 to 5 years? It's going to be Bitcoin custody. And the next thing you want after custody is Bitcoin yield. And I have a fair degree of certainty that we will see most major banks either directly custody Bitcoin or will use a third party like a Coinbase, et cetera, to manage that for them. And that's another one of these massive shifts of, a couple years ago, maybe crypto's dead to now every bank's going to have, a Bitcoin product, and they're going to need different rails that allow them to offer these products and services. And that's where I think if you can think of dual staking as one of these primitives, okay, that gets interesting as a way to be able to give your customers rewards for Bitcoin that they may or may not custody with you. This is where Bitcoin bonds, et cetera, come into place. And we spent, quite a bit of time working with these design partners help build, let's call it, core Bitcoin in a box, to not only the proliferation of getting these Bitcoin products out there, some of the largest institutions in the world, but also directly benefit core token holders with that exact kind of end around thing that I mentioned before. And I think that's a much longer play, admittedly, but I think that's a really interesting business long term. And I think it's incredibly sticky. And I think that's something that we were fortunate enough to have the opportunity to be able to get the front row seat to watch all this organizational change and then to help co-create these awesome products and services.
Yeah. I think going off of this, Rich, I'm curious, what are the kinds of conversations that you're having with institutions to drive this adoption, right? Because it's important to, like I said earlier, like educate them, but also bring them in. So, what are the conversations on this front that you think would make this one a more like lucrative and competitive area once you kind of get them on board?
Many of these conversations start exactly the way that you product, having problem 1 and problem 2. And it's like, how
Sure.
can you help me unlock, like one or both of those things, right? And I think that's what's kind of interesting is like in crypto, we spend so much time trying to reinvent the wheel. Like I always laugh at the revenue meta. You mean business, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
and in general, I think that's what a lot of the approaches have been towards these, institutions historically. It's been, let me try to force some square peg in a round hole that doesn't actually meet your needs. And instead, we take a pretty different approach, which is, okay, here are your major problems. How do we unlock them? And it's this discovery process that I think has yielded fruit and will ultimately result in many of these products that come to market in 2026, and then some of these longer tail enterprise offerings that we're co-creating. But it's not rocket science. It's just building stuff that people want. And I think right now there's so much demand for Bitcoin products and Bitcoin yield products. And it's like, how do we go get those out there and allow others to go create those? And I think if we can be successful in there, there's really no stopping us.
Mhm. In terms of the demand side of things, do you find it competitive when talking to these institutions?
I think everything in crypto is competitive, to be honest. I think the ability to deliver on those things is very different, and I think that's been something we've been very fortunate about having, a long-standing record of delivering products and services and being the category leader of many of these products and services, and now seeing many, replica products get created. I think, is the feather in our cap when it comes to that, and I think we'll continue to do so. But we generally want this to be more competitive, right? Like this space is so small now, and Bitcoin now is a multi-trillion-dollar asset. It's not all going to go into a core product tomorrow. It's not all going to go into a competitor product tomorrow. And I think we're at the stage where we should be working almost collectively to a degree to do as much education as we can, because I think this is what's going to. And I, mentioned at the beginning of the call that this space is not moving as fast as I would have anticipated. So I think this is where, if we
Mhm.
work collectively to try to push some of these things forward, I think we can help bring this about faster, and I think everyone will wind up being, better off.
Yeah. Okay. Looking beyond yield, asset management protocols, liquid staking tokens, all these things we kind of discussed today. How do you kind of think about new verticals like privacy, AI driven execution, RWAs on the expansion side for demand for core and then, reinforcing the ecosystem's growth long term?
So taking a deviation from like yield and some of the other pieces, I think there's many parts of Bitcoin that are still not addressed, is kind of how I would describe it. And there's some awesome work being done by, Zcash and Starkware and some of these other folks that have really led the privacy charge in particular. But I think we aren't too far from a place where we will have, private Bitcoin. Probably not on Bitcoin L1. I don't see that
Right.
happening. We lost that battle a long time ago. But in general, I think we're going to get to a spot not far from now where people are going to demand privacy in their different transactions. And the alternative is we wind up with like all these federated networks and like just kind of all this mess. And I don't think that's too interesting of a place to be. So that's an area that we're spending time in as well. And we're also spending time in some post quantum things. Like the idea here is making the core ledger be fully adaptable, ready for these new products and services that will need to get built to meet these customer demands that may not be here today, but are probably here a year from now, 2 years from now. Like I don't think we're too far away from that. And then on the other side, you get to RWAs. We've long been bullish on RWAs. We've had some initial forays here, but we haven't put too much effort behind it. But I think that's another frontier Bitcoin use. And this is something else that we hear from institutions, which what can I use it for? I don't want to sell it. So, okay, what are these different products and
Mhm.
services that you might be able to allocate into? Is it, real estate investing, you name it, whiskey barrels, there's so many different things that you could get into. But I think that's another frontier opportunity that I think as of now is pretty esoteric and pretty bespoke. But I think we'll see some traction pick up probably in the later half of 2026 and then maybe 2027 onwards. But we have this very large untapped capital base, and I think you're going to want to see people put it to work in all sorts of interesting ways.
Yeah. Rich, I guess with all these moving parts, what are you most excited about for Core's trajectory into 2026?
Oh man, it's tough to narrow it down to just one thing, I think. But I'm really excited in 2026 about being able to activate these large pools of capital and bring them into the core ecosystem.
Mhm.
And this has been something we've been working on for a number of, figure out how to cross that bridge. And it's a hard process. We've spent many years educating institutions on the value of core as well as retail people around the world of what being a core holder, like what benefits you get from that, everything else. And just been harder and a longer process than any of us would have liked. And we've made a lot of progress, and that is part of our moat today. But I think now we have the opportunity to have these new form factors to bring people in, whether it's the swipe of a credit card or the minting of an LST. And I think those are incredibly scalable mechanisms. And I think that's something that I'm so fired up about for 2026, because I think this is where we can finally get to the scalability with these other products and services to make that whole loop complete. And that's something we've been trying to do for many years now. So I think seeing that now just over the horizon is what gets me most excited about 2026.
Mhm. Yeah, it's like all these unified parts coming together, right?
Culmination of many years of
Yeah.
effort all kind of rolling over together.
Yeah. Last thing, Rich, we've obviously got a great audience of people. I think you believe you call them Cortoshis. Am I right? Yeah.
Yes, the
Yes.
Cortoshis are one of the strongest communities in all of crypto. I'd stack
Yes.
them up against anyone.
The Cortoshis, if you had a message to them looking into 2026, what would it be?
2026 is going to be a big year for all Cortoshis out there. I think with each product and services that we work on or we co-create with others, I think the key piece is revenue and buybacks are the key piece of the story. And we appreciate, being with us for so many years already, but there's so many years of promise right on the horizon. And we couldn't be any more excited about 2026 and all the things that we plan to bring to you guys.
Amazing. Well, Rich, thank you for taking the time today. And thank you to everyone else for listening in. Looking forward to talking more about Core's ecosystem developments next quarter.
Sounds good.